It was March 15th, 2024, my son Daniel's 32nd birthday. I had spent 3 days preparing his favorite chocolate cake, the same recipe I had perfected when he was 7 years old. The dining room was decorated with the care that only a mother's hands know how to give. Everything was ready for our small celebration, just the two of us, as it had been since his father passed away 5 years ago. Daniel walked into the house with that expression I had learned to fear. Cold eyes, tight jaw, the same look he gave his business partners when he was about to close a deal that wasn't in their favor. But this time, that look was directed at me. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, not even glancing at the cake or the decorations I'd spent hours arranging. I smiled, trying to maintain the warmth of the moment. "Of course, honey. But first, let me light the candles. I made your favorite cake, remember? The one with—" "Stop." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Just stop with this suffocating maternal act." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, with the lighter still in my hand, watching my son's face transform into something I didn't recognize. "You want to know what the best birthday gift would be for me?" Daniel continued, his voice growing colder with each word. "For you to disappear from my life. Completely. No more surprise visits, no more cakes, no more calls asking about my day. I'm tired of having to pretend I care about this whole loving son routine." Can you imagine hearing those words from the child you carried in your womb for 9 months? The same child you held in your arms during sleepless nights? The one you sacrificed everything for? What would you do if the person you loved most in the world told you that your love was a burden they could no longer bear? I held back my tears. Years of corporate experience as a senior partner at Morrison & Associates had taught me never to show vulnerability in moments of attack. But this wasn't a hostile takeover or a difficult negotiation. This was my son destroying me in the place where I should have felt safest. "Daniel, I don't understand where this is coming from," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "If I did something wrong, we can talk about it." "We've always been able to—" "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. I'm 32 years old. I have my own life, my own plans, and frankly, they don't include a lonely widow who thinks she can live vicariously through her son." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time, his eyes showing not a trace of the boy I had raised. "I'm going to Europe for 3 weeks. Business trip. When I get back, I expect you to have understood the message. I want space. Permanent space." The door slammed shut, and I was left alone with a birthday cake full of unlit candles and a broken heart. I remained silent in that dining room, surrounded by decorations that now seemed like mockery of my maternal devotion. But even in that moment of absolute devastation, a part of me, the lawyer part, the strategic part, was already analyzing the situation with the coldness I had learned in 40 years of practice. Daniel thought he knew who he was dealing with. He thought he was discarding a helpless old woman, a burden he could simply set aside when convenient. He had forgotten something crucial. I wasn't just his mother. I was Catherine Beaumont, the woman who had built one of the most respected law firms on the West Coast, who had faced corporate sharks and emerged victorious. But most importantly, he had forgotten that I knew all his secrets, every single one. I remained quiet that night, but I already knew that when Daniel returned from his trip, my response would forever change the destiny of our relationship. What he would find upon his return would be something he never imagined possible. And for the first time in months, despite the pain crushing my chest, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. The anticipation of someone who holds all the cards and is about to play them. The morning after Daniel left for Europe, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The tears had dried during the night, replaced by something much more powerful: determination. I made my coffee in the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my ungrateful son, and I began to think like the lawyer I had always been. Something about Daniel's cruelty felt orchestrated, too calculated to be spontaneous. In my 4 decades practicing law, I had learned to recognize when someone was being influenced by external forces. My son's words carried the echo of another voice, another agenda. I opened my laptop and began what I knew best: investigation. Daniel thought he was dealing with a heartbroken mother, but he had forgotten he was facing a woman who had spent years uncovering corporate conspiracies and family frauds. The first thing I discovered was disturbing. Daniel's social media, which he rarely used, now showed photos from expensive restaurants and exclusive events. Pictures with people I didn't recognize, wearing clothes that cost more than his monthly salary as a mid-level marketing executive should allow. But what really caught my attention was a woman who appeared in several recent photos. Elegant, around 28 years old, with the calculated smile of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. The comments revealed her name, Isabella Martinez, and the way she looked at my son in those photos made my stomach turn. I called my old friend Margaret, a private investigator who had worked with me on several cases over the years. "Catherine, darling, it's been too long." Margaret's gravelly voice filled the silence of my empty house. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to investigate someone. Isabella Martinez. I believe she's involved with my son Daniel." "Trouble in paradise?" "Something like that." "Margaret, I need everything. Financial background, previous relationships, family history, everything you can find. Consider it done. You know I owe you after that divorce case you won for my daughter." While Margaret worked her magic, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I drove to Daniel's apartment building, a modest place in downtown Seattle that he had chosen when he moved out of my house 3 years ago. The doorman, George, had always been friendly with me during my visits. "Mrs. Beaumont, how lovely to see you." George smiled genuinely. "Daniel isn't here, you know. He left for a trip a few days ago." "Yes, I know. Actually, George, I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed anyone new visiting Daniel lately?" George's expression changed slightly. He looked around as if making sure no one was listening. "Well, there has been this young lady. Very elegant, drives an expensive car. She's been coming here almost every night for the past 2 months. Every night. Sometimes she stays until the next morning, if you know what I mean." My heart sank, but not from maternal jealousy. Something much worse was forming in my mind. "George, this might seem like a strange question, but have you noticed any changes in Daniel's behavior lately?" The elderly doorman hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mrs. Beaumont, you've always been kind to me, so I'm going to be honest. Your son? He's become different, more arrogant, more cold. He used to greet me, ask about my family. Now he barely acknowledges I exist. And that young lady, she always looks at people like they're beneath her." I thanked George and returned to my car, my mind racing. Isabella Martinez wasn't just a girlfriend. She was an influence, a catalyst that was transforming my son into someone I didn't recognize. That afternoon, Margaret called with preliminary information that confirmed my worst fears. "Catherine, you're not going to like what I found. Isabella Martinez isn't exactly who she appears to be. She comes from a wealthy family in Los Angeles, but her personal finances are a disaster. She's accumulated significant debts, and there are rumors about her involvement in relationships with older, financially stable men." Continue. "But here's the interesting part. She seems to have a pattern. She gets involved with men who have potential for inheritance or family money, gains their trust, and then, well, let's say these men often end up making financial decisions that benefit her." The pieces were starting to fit together. Isabella hadn't chosen Daniel for love. She had chosen him because she knew about me, about my wealth, about the inheritance that would one day be his. But what she didn't know was that Daniel's cruel words had just activated something in me that had been dormant for too long, my survival instinct. That night, as I sat in my study surrounded by legal books and investigation files, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Daniel's birthday attack hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned. Isabella needed me out of the picture to have free access to my son, and eventually to my fortune. But she had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated the wrong woman. I opened my safe and retrieved documents I hadn't touched in years. My will, my financial statements, my property deeds, everything Daniel believed would be his when I died. It was time to show both of them that Catherine Beaumont wasn't a helpless old woman waiting to be discarded. I was a strategist who was about to play the most important game of her life, and I intended to win. 3 days into Daniel's European trip, Margaret delivered a bombshell that changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. "Catherine, sit down for this one," she said, her voice unusually serious over the phone. Isabella Martinez isn't just a gold digger. She's part of something much more sophisticated. I was in my home office, surrounded by legal pads filled with notes and timelines I had been constructing. What do you mean? She's connected to a group of people who specialize in what they call inheritance acceleration. They target middle-aged individuals with wealthy, aging parents. The goal isn't just to influence these people, it's to systematically isolate them from their families and redirect inheritance flows. My blood ran cold. You're saying this is organized? Very organized. I found connections between Isabella and at least 3 other similar cases in California over the past 2 years. In each case, adult children suddenly became hostile toward their parents, cut off contact, and within months, significant financial transfers occurred. Transfers to whom? Various shell companies, all eventually traceable back to the same network. Catherine, your son isn't just being manipulated by a girlfriend. He's been targeted by what amounts to a criminal organization. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. This explained everything. The sudden change in Daniel's personality, the calculated cruelty of his birthday attack, the timing of everything. There's more, Margaret continued. I managed to access some of Isabella's communications through a contact I have in cybersecurity. Daniel has already signed several documents that he believes are related to investments Isabella recommended. But these documents, Catherine, they're preliminary steps for financial power of attorney transfers. What? I stood up so quickly that papers scattered from my desk. If something were to happen to you, if you were to become incapacitated, hospitalized, or worse, Daniel would have the legal authority to make decisions about your assets. And based on the pattern I'm seeing, Isabella has been conditioning him to believe that such drastic measures might be necessary for your own good. The room seemed to spin around me. This wasn't just about isolating me from my son. This was about positioning Daniel to take control of my fortune while I was still alive, under the guise of caring for an aging, mentally unstable mother. Margaret, I need you to dig deeper. I want to know everything about this network, every person involved, every scheme they've run. Already on it. But Catherine, there's something else you need to know. Based on the timeline I'm seeing, they're moving fast. Daniel's trip to Europe isn't just a vacation. He's meeting with people there, people connected to this network. I believe they're preparing for the next phase. After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, processing the magnitude of what I had discovered. My son hadn't just been cruel to me, he had been weaponized against me. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Anger, pure, focused rage at the people who had dared to use my child against me. I picked up my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Jonathan Pierce, my former law partner and one of the most ruthless attorneys I knew. Catherine Beaumont. His familiar voice carried a hint of surprise. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Jonathan, I need your help, and I need absolute discretion. You have my attention. I spent the next hour explaining the situation, watching Jonathan's legal mind immediately grasp the implications. This is bigger than family manipulation, Catherine. What you're describing sounds like organized fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. We're talking about federal crimes. I know, and I want to not only stop them, but destroy them completely. Now that sounds like the Catherine Beaumont I remember. What do you need? I need a team. Investigators, financial analysts, cybersecurity experts, and I need them to work completely under the radar. Consider it done. But Catherine, if we're going to take down an organization like this, we need to be smart about it. They've probably planned for the possibility that some of their targets might fight back, which is why we're going to use their own strategy against them. They think they're dealing with a lonely, vulnerable old woman. Let them keep thinking that while we build our case. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since my husband's funeral. I went to his study and opened the safe where he kept his most important documents. Robert had been a federal prosecutor before becoming a judge, and he had taught me something crucial about fighting criminal organizations. The key to bringing down a conspiracy, he used to say, is to make them believe they're winning right up until the moment you destroy them. I found what I was looking for. Robert's old contacts in the FBI, people who specialized in financial crimes and organized fraud, people who would be very interested in what Margaret and I had discovered. As I prepared to make those calls, I thought about Daniel, somewhere in Europe, believing he was in control of his own decisions while being manipulated like a puppet. My son thought he had discarded a useless mother. But what he had actually done was awaken a predator who had spent 40 years learning how to hunt people exactly like those who were using him. They wanted to play games with inheritance and family manipulation? Perfect. I was about to show them what happened when they chose the wrong family to destroy. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and they had no idea what was coming for them. By the end of Daniel's first week in Europe, my investigation had uncovered something that made my blood freeze in my veins. This wasn't just about my son and me. This was about a network that had been operating for years, destroying families across the country with surgical precision. Jonathan's team had been working around the clock, and what they discovered was both brilliant and terrifying in its scope. "Catherine, you need to see this," Jonathan said, spreading documents across my dining room table, the same table where Daniel had delivered his birthday attack. "What we're looking at is a sophisticated operation that targets wealthy widows and widowers through their adult children." The papers before me told a story that chilled me to the bone. Isabella Martinez was connected to at least 12 other cases spanning 3 states. The pattern was always the same: identify wealthy, aging parents with adult children who had access to family finances, seduce or befriend the children, systematically poison the relationship between parent and child, then position the manipulated child to take control of assets while the parent was still alive. "Look at this case from San Francisco," Jonathan pointed to a file. "Evelyn Richardson, 73 years old, widow, worth approximately $4 million. Her daughter Sarah suddenly became hostile, accused her mother of being mentally unstable, and initiated guardianship proceedings. Sarah's boyfriend, connected to the same network as Isabella, convinced her it was for her mother's own good. What happened to Mrs. Richardson? She's in a state facility. Her daughter controls all her assets now, and those assets are being systematically drained through care expenses and investment opportunities that all trace back to the network." I felt sick. How many people are we talking about? Based on what we've found so far, at least 30 families over the past 3 years. Conservative estimate of stolen assets, over $60 million. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. "Catherine, there's something else." Jonathan's voice became even more serious. "I had my cybersecurity team analyze Daniel's communications, the ones we could legally access. He's not just being manipulated anymore. He's becoming an active participant. He handed me printed emails that made my world crumble. Messages from Daniel to Isabella discussing my concerning behavior, my need for professional help, my dangerous isolation that required intervention. One email, dated just 2 days before his birthday attack, made me gasp. "Isabella, you're right. Mom has been acting strange lately. Maybe it is time to consider more drastic measures. I can't let her hurt herself or waste the family money on these paranoid fantasies she's been having." "Paranoid fantasies?" I whispered. "They've been gaslighting him, Catherine. Slowly, systematically convincing him that you're mentally unstable, that your independence is dangerous, that he needs to take control for your own protection." The cruelest part was reading Daniel's genuine concern in those messages. He wasn't just being greedy. He had been convinced that isolating me and taking control of my finances was an act of love, a way to protect a mother who was losing her grip on reality. "There's more," Jonathan continued. "While Daniel is in Europe, Isabella has been busy here. She's been meeting with attorneys, discussing guardianship procedures, researching facilities for elderly people with cognitive decline. They're planning to have me institutionalized. It appears so." "And Daniel's European trip?" "He's meeting with people who specialize in offshore asset management. They're preparing to move your money somewhere it can't be traced or recovered." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of their betrayal. But then, something shifted inside me. The shock and pain began to transform into something harder, colder, more dangerous. "Jonathan, I want you to contact the FBI, specifically Agent Sarah Chen in the Financial Crimes Division. She worked with Robert on several cases. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to stop being a victim and start being a weapon. If you've ever felt the moment when vulnerability transforms into power, when pain becomes purpose, you'll understand what happened to me in that instant. I realized that Isabella and her network had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had targeted me believing I was just another lonely widow, another easy mark. They had forgotten to ask themselves a crucial question. What happens when you try to destroy someone who spent 40 years destroying criminals in courtrooms? That evening, I called Agent Chen. Mrs. Beaumont, her voice was warm with recognition. It's been too long. How can I help you? Sarah, I have a federal case for you. Financial fraud, elder abuse, organized conspiracy across multiple states. And I'm offering myself as bait to bring them down. I'm listening. I spent the next 2 hours explaining everything we had discovered. Agent Chen's responses grew increasingly interested as the scope of the operation became clear. This is exactly the kind of case we've been hoping to crack, she said finally. We've had reports of similar patterns, but we've never had someone on the inside who was both a target and qualified to help build the case. What do you need from me? We need you to let them believe they're winning. Continue being the vulnerable widow they think you are while we build the federal case. Can you do that? Agent Chen, they chose the wrong woman to underestimate. By the time I'm finished with them, they're going to wish they had never heard the name Catherine Beaumont. As I hung up the phone, I realized something that filled me with grim satisfaction. Daniel thought he would return from Europe to find a broken mother who had accepted her fate. Instead, he was about to walk into a carefully orchestrated trap that would expose not only Isabella, but the entire criminal network she worked for. They wanted to play games with family bonds and elderly people's lives. Perfect. It was time to show them what happened when they chose to manipulate a federal prosecutor's widow. The real game was just beginning, and I held all the cards they didn't even know existed. 2 days before Daniel's return from Europe, I received a call that confirmed my worst fears and solidified my resolve for what had to be done. Mrs. Beaumont? The voice was unfamiliar, professionally courteous. This is Dr. Patricia Whitman from Serenity Hills Care Facility. I understand your son has been making inquiries about our services for elderly family members experiencing cognitive difficulties. My hand gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I haven't authorized anyone to make such inquiries on my behalf. Oh, I apologize for the confusion. Mr. Beaumont explained that you've been having some memory issues lately and that he's handling your affairs now. He's scheduled a consultation for the day after tomorrow to discuss our specialized programs for seniors with early-stage dementia. The audacity was breathtaking. While I had been investigating them, they had been preparing my cage. Dr. Whitman, I can assure you that I have no cognitive issues whatsoever. I'm a retired attorney, and I believe someone is attempting to defraud both you and me. I'd like to schedule a time to meet with you personally to clear up this misunderstanding. The silence on the other end was telling. Mrs. Beaumont, perhaps it would be best if you came in with your son. Family decisions are always easier when everyone is present. After I hung up, I immediately called Agent Chen. They're moving faster than we anticipated, I told her. They've already contacted a care facility. Sarah, if we don't act soon, I could find myself institutionalized before we can build the case. We're almost ready, Catherine. My team has been working with the information you and Jonathan provided. We've identified at least 15 victims across 4 states, and we have enough evidence to move forward. But we need to catch them in the act to make the charges stick. What do you need me to do? Exactly what you've been doing. Play the part of the vulnerable widow. But we're going to wire you, and we're going to record every conversation. When Daniel comes back and they make their move, we'll have everything we need. That afternoon, I did something that felt like the ultimate betrayal, even knowing it was necessary. I called my son. Daniel's voice when he answered was cold, distant, exactly what I had expected. Mom, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Daniel, honey, I've been thinking about what you said before you left. I made my voice small, uncertain, the voice of a woman who had been broken down. Maybe you were right. Maybe I have been too clingy. The change in his tone was immediate, and it broke my heart. Mom, I'm glad you're finally seeing this. It's for your own good, you know. I've been worried about you. I know, sweetheart. And I've been having some difficulties lately. Forgetting things, getting confused. I think I might need help. What kind of help? His voice carried a note I recognized from his childhood. Genuine concern mixed with something else. Relief. I don't know. Maybe someone who understands these kinds of problems. Maybe it's time for me to not live alone anymore. Mom, that's very mature of you to recognize that. Actually, I've been looking into some options. There are some really nice places where you could get the care you need. You've been looking into places for me? Just research, Mom. I want what's best for you. I know I was harsh before I left, but it's because I love you and I'm worried about you. The manipulation was so smooth, so caring in its presentation, that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have been grateful for his concern. When do you come back, Daniel? I'd like to talk to you about all of this. Tomorrow night. And Mom, thank you for being open to getting help. It means everything to me. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not from sadness, but from grief for the son I was losing and rage at the people who had stolen him from me. The next morning, Agent Chen and her team arrived at my house before dawn to install surveillance equipment. Remember, Catherine, she instructed, as a technician fitted me with a nearly invisible recording device. Let them reveal their plan. Don't confront them directly. We need them to explicitly discuss their intentions regarding your assets and your institutionalization. How will I know when you're ready to move in? We'll have agents positioned around your property. The moment we have what we need, or the moment you're in any danger, we'll intervene. That evening, I prepared my house for what I knew would be the most difficult performance of my life. I made dinner for Daniel, set the table with our good china, and waited for my son to come home so I could destroy the people who had destroyed him. When I heard his key in the lock, my heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was it, the moment when I would either save my son or lose him forever. Mom? Daniel's voice called out as he entered. I'm home, but when I walked into the living room, I saw that he hadn't come alone. Isabella Martinez stood beside him, her arm possessively around his waist, her smile as cold and calculated as a snake preparing to strike. I hope you don't mind, Daniel said, his voice already taking on that defensive tone I had learned to recognize. I brought Isabella. She's been so helpful during this difficult time, and I thought she should be part of our conversation. Isabella extended her hand to me with practiced warmth. Mrs. Beaumont, it's so wonderful to finally meet you properly. Daniel has told me so much about your situation. I want you to know that we're both here to support you through this transition. As I shook her hand, looking into the eyes of the woman who had orchestrated my family's destruction, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my days in the courtroom facing the most dangerous criminals. The thrill of the hunt. The satisfaction of knowing that the prey has no idea they're about to be caught. Please, come sit down, I said, my voice perfectly calibrated to sound grateful and slightly confused. I've made dinner. We have so much to discuss. What they didn't know was that every word they were about to speak was being recorded, and that outside my house, federal agents were waiting for them to hang themselves with their own words. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. As we sat around my dining room table, the same table where Daniel had shattered my heart just 3 weeks ago, I began what would be the most crucial performance of my life. Everything depended on making them believe I was exactly what they thought, a broken, confused woman ready to surrender control of her life. Daniel, sweetie, I'm so glad you're home, I said, my voice carrying just the right tremor of uncertainty. I've been so confused lately. Sometimes I forget what day it is, or where I put things. Isabella leaned forward with practiced sympathy. Mrs. Beaumont, that must be very frightening for you. It's completely normal to feel overwhelmed when these changes start happening. You seem to know a lot about this, I replied, playing the grateful elder perfectly. Have you dealt with this kind of thing before? I have some experience with elderly care, Isabella lied smoothly. I've helped several families navigate these difficult transitions. The most important thing is recognizing when you need support. Daniel reached across and patted my hand. Mom, Isabella has been amazing. She's helped me understand that your episodes aren't your fault, but we need to make sure you're safe. Episodes? I made my voice small, worried. Is that what they're called? Sometimes you've seemed disoriented when we've talked, Daniel continued, his concern sounding genuine even as he delivered the calculated manipulation. Remember last month when you called me 3 times asking if I was coming to dinner, even though we had never made plans? I had never made those calls, but I nodded as if trying to remember, watching Isabella's eyes gleam with satisfaction. The thing is, Mrs. Beaumont, Isabella said, her voice dripping with false compassion. These symptoms often get worse quickly. The best thing for everyone, especially for you, is to plan ahead while you're still able to make decisions. What kind of planning? Daniel and Isabella exchanged a look that they thought was subtle but felt like watching conspirators in action. Well, Daniel began carefully, there are legal documents we should prepare. Powers of attorney, healthcare directives. And we should probably look into living arrangements that would give you more support. You mean I can't live here anymore? I made my voice break slightly. Mom, this house is too big for you, too isolated. What if something happened and no one was here to help you? Isabella jumped in smoothly. We've actually looked at some wonderful facilities, places where you'd have your own space but with medical staff nearby, where you'd have activities and social interaction. That sounds expensive, I said, playing the worried elder perfectly. Don't worry about the cost, Daniel assured me. We can use the house and some of your investments to cover it. The important thing is getting you the care you need. There it was, the first explicit mention of using my assets. I saw Agent Chen's words in my mind. Let them reveal their plan. But Daniel, that's your inheritance. I don't want to spend your future on my problems. Mom, you're more important than money, he said. And for a moment, I heard my real son underneath the manipulation. Besides, Isabella has some investment ideas that could actually grow the remaining assets while paying for your care. Isabella nodded enthusiastically. I have connections with some very successful international investment groups. We could potentially triple your remaining assets while ensuring you get the best possible care. International investments? I asked, knowing full well where this was heading. Offshore opportunities that aren't available to regular investors, Isabella explained. The returns are incredible, but they require moving money quickly when opportunities arise. That's why the power of attorney is so important. Daniel would need to be able to act immediately when I identify the right investments. My heart was racing, but not from fear. From the anticipation of watching these people dig their own graves with every word. This all sounds very complicated, I said. Maybe I should talk to my attorney first? The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Daniel and Isabella exchanged another look, this one sharp with concern. Mom, remember we talked about this? Daniel's voice took on a slightly patronizing tone. You've been having some paranoid thoughts lately. Last week, you told me you thought someone was trying to steal from you. Your attorney retired 2 years ago, remember? I had never said anything about paranoid thoughts, and my attorney had retired 5 years ago, not 2, but I nodded as if trying to piece together confused memories. I did say that, didn't I? Sometimes I can't tell what's real anymore. Isabella leaned closer, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. That's exactly why we need to act now, while you're having a clear moment. These lucid periods become less frequent as the condition progresses. Condition? The early-stage dementia, Mom, Daniel said gently. We should be grateful we caught it this early. I had never been diagnosed with dementia. I had never even been tested for it. But here they were, discussing my non-existent condition as if it were established fact. I suppose you're right, I said, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. I just want to do what's best for everyone. When would we need to make these arrangements? Actually, Isabella said, pulling a folder from her purse. I took the liberty of having some preliminary documents prepared. Nothing binding, just drafts to start the process. If you're feeling up to it, we could review them tonight. As she spread papers across my dining room table, I realized they had planned this entire conversation. Every emotional manipulation, every logical step toward getting me to sign away my life. But what they didn't realize was that every word they had spoken was being recorded, and that outside my house, federal agents were hearing them commit multiple felonies in real time. These papers look very official, I said, picking up a power of attorney document that would give Daniel complete control over my finances. Are you sure this is what we need to do? Trust me, Mrs. Beaumont, Isabella said, her mask slipping just slightly. This is definitely what needs to happen. As I picked up the pen to sign documents that would destroy my life, I thought about all the families they had already destroyed, All the elderly people sitting in facilities while their money was stolen by the children who were supposed to protect them. But mostly, I thought about how satisfying it was going to be when Agent Chen and her team walked through my front door. The hunter was about to reveal herself, and they had no idea their perfect plan was about to become their perfect downfall. As I held the pen over the power of attorney document, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. In my peripheral vision, I could see Daniel leaning forward anxiously, while Isabella's eyes were fixed on my hand with predatory intensity. "I just want to make sure I understand everything," I said, stalling for time while letting them reveal more of their plan. "Once I sign this, Daniel can make all my financial decisions?" "Only when necessary, Mom," Daniel assured me. "Only to protect you and manage your care." Isabella nodded eagerly. "And the beauty of it is that Daniel can act quickly when those investment opportunities I mentioned become available. Time is crucial in international markets." "How quickly are we talking about?" I asked innocently. "Sometimes within hours," Isabella explained, her excitement making her careless with details. "My contact in the Cayman Islands requires immediate transfers when he identifies opportunities. But the returns are extraordinary. We're talking about turning your current assets into enough money to keep you comfortable for decades." Cayman Islands. Immediate transfers. Agent Chen would be very interested in those specifics. "That sounds wonderful," I said, my voice filled with the gratitude of a confused woman who believed her family was saving her. "But what happens to my house? This has been my home for 30 years. "We'll need to sell it fairly quickly," Daniel said, his tone suggesting this had already been decided. "The money from the sale will be the initial investment capital. Plus, maintaining an empty house while you're in care doesn't make financial sense." "You've already thought of everything," I marveled, playing the impressed elder perfectly. "But what if I change my mind? What if I decide I want to come back home?" Isabella's smile became razor sharp. "Mrs. Beaumont, one of the signs of your condition is that your judgment becomes compromised. That's why we need to make these decisions now, while you're still capable of seeing what's best for you." "And if I try to change my mind later?" "The documents include provisions for that," Isabella explained with chilling efficiency. "If you become unable to make sound decisions, which your doctor will certify, Daniel will have the authority to override any confused choices you might try to make." "Doctor? What doctor?" "I'm not sure I understand." "What doctor?" Daniel looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Dr. Whitman at Serenity Hills has already agreed to evaluate you, Mom. She's reviewed your case and believes residential care is the appropriate next step." "Reviewed my case? But I've never met her." "I provided her with information about your recent episodes," Daniel said quickly. "It's standard procedure for preliminary evaluations." Everything clicked into place with crystal clarity. They had already built a paper trail of my supposed mental decline, created medical opinions from doctors who had never examined me, and prepared a legal framework that would make it nearly impossible for me to regain control of my life once I signed these documents. "This is all happening so fast," I said, letting a note of panic creep into my voice. "Maybe we should wait a few days. Let me think about it." Isabella's demeanor changed instantly. The warm, caring facade dropped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Mrs. Beaumont, with all due respect, that kind of thinking is exactly why we need to act now. The hesitation, the second-guessing, these are symptoms of your condition. You asked us to help you, and now you're backing away from the help you need." "Isabella's right, Mom," Daniel added, and I could hear the coaching in his words. "Earlier tonight, you said you were confused and needed support. You can't keep changing your mind like this. It's not rational." They were gaslighting me in real time, using my own request for help as evidence that I couldn't be trusted to make decisions. It was masterfully executed psychological manipulation. "You're both right," I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated. "I'm sorry. I'm just scared." "Of course you are," Isabella soothed, the fake warmth returning instantly. "Change is always frightening. But think about how peaceful it will be, not having to worry about all these complicated decisions anymore. Daniel and I will take care of everything." As I moved the pen toward the signature line, I made one final play to get them to reveal the complete scope of their plan. "Will you visit me? In the facility, I mean. I don't want to be alone." Daniel's face softened with what looked like genuine emotion. "Of course, Mom. As often as I can." But Isabella's response was more revealing. Actually, Mrs. Beaumont, the transition is often easier when family maintains some distance initially. It helps patients adjust to their new environment without constantly looking backward. How long would that be? Several months, at least. Maybe longer, depending on your adjustment. Several months, long enough to liquidate my assets and disappear them into offshore accounts where they could never be recovered. I was about to sign the document when I heard what I had been waiting for. The sound of car doors closing in my driveway. What was that? Daniel asked, looking toward the window. Probably just neighbors, I said calmly. So many people coming and going in this neighborhood lately. But Isabella had gone rigid, her predatory instincts apparently sharper than Daniel's. Maybe we should finish this tomorrow, she said suddenly. Give your mother time to rest and think clearly. Too late. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by a firm knock that could only mean one thing. FBI! Mrs. Beaumont, this is Agent Chen. We need to speak with you. The color drained from Isabella's face as Daniel looked between her and the door in complete confusion. What's happening? He asked. Why are the FBI here? I set down the pen and looked directly at Isabella Martinez for the first time with my real eyes, not the confused, vulnerable woman I had been pretending to be, but the federal prosecutor's widow who had spent 40 years destroying people exactly like her. They're here, I said, my voice now steady and strong, because you just confessed to multiple federal crimes while being recorded by federal agents. Isabella bolted toward the back door, but Agent Chen had anticipated that. The sound of the front door opening was followed immediately by voices from the backyard. Nobody move! FBI! Daniel stared at me in shock, his face a mixture of betrayal and dawning comprehension. Mom, what's going on? What have you done? I stood up from my chair, removing the recording device that had captured every incriminating word they had spoken. What I've done, Daniel, is save you from becoming an accessory to organized fraud and elder abuse. What I've done is destroy the criminal network that turned my son against me and used him to steal from dozens of families just like ours. As Agent Chen and her team entered my dining room, Isabella Martinez sat in handcuffs at my table, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. But the hardest part was still ahead, looking at my son and seeing not the criminal who had betrayed me, but the victim who had been manipulated into betraying himself. The trap had worked perfectly, but I was about to discover that winning the war and healing the wounds were two very different things. The next few hours passed in a blur of federal agents, evidence bags, and the systematic dismantling of what Isabella Martinez had believed was her perfect crime. As Agent Chen's team processed the scene, I sat in my living room watching my son's world collapse in real time. Daniel hadn't spoken since the moment I revealed the truth. He sat in my kitchen, staring at the legal documents that would have signed away my life, while Agent Chen questioned Isabella in my dining room. The woman who had seemed so confident, so in control just hours earlier, was now desperately trying to negotiate her way out of federal charges. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Chen's voice carried the authority of someone who had handled countless cases like this. We have recordings of you discussing offshore accounts, fraudulent medical evaluations, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Your cooperation now might influence how this proceeds. You don't understand, Isabella protested, her carefully modulated voice now sharp with panic. I was trying to help Daniel protect his mother. She's clearly suffering from dementia. Anyone can see that. Really? Because the woman I've been working with for the past week to build this case seems remarkably sharp to me. Through the doorway, I could see Isabella's face when the full scope of what had happened hit her. She had been outmaneuvered not by a confused elderly woman, but by someone who understood the law better than she did. Agent Chen came into the living room where I was sitting with Daniel. Mrs. Beaumont, we'll need full statements from both of you, but the preliminary evidence is overwhelming. Between the recordings, the financial documents we found in Ms. Martinez's possession, and the pattern evidence we already had, we're looking at multiple federal charges. What about Daniel? I asked, looking at my son who seemed to have aged years in the past few hours. That depends on several factors. From what we've recorded tonight, it appears he was manipulated rather than consciously participating in fraud. But we'll need to determine the extent of his knowledge about the broader operation. Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. Isabella said you were sick. She showed me research about dementia, articles about how family members often don't want to admit when their parents are declining. What else did she show you, Daniel? Medical reports. She said she had a friend who was a doctor, someone who specialized in geriatric conditions. The report said you were showing early signs of cognitive decline, and that intervention was necessary. Agent Chen made a note. Those reports were fabricated, Mr. Beaumont. Dr. Patricia Whitman at Serenity Hills confirmed that she never examined your mother or authorized any evaluation. But the phone calls, Daniel said, looking at me with confusion and growing horror. You called me multiple times, confused about dinner plans, asking the same questions repeatedly. I never made those calls, Daniel. Agent Chen pulled out her tablet. We found evidence of spoofed phone calls in Ms. Martinez's communication records. She used voice modification software and number spoofing to make calls that appeared to come from your mother's phone. The implications hit Daniel like physical blows. She faked calls from Mom to make me think she was getting worse? Among other things, the episodes you witnessed, the concerning behavior you noticed, how much of that happened when Ms. Martinez was present or shortly after you'd spoken with her? Daniel's face crumbled as he traced back through months of manipulation. All of it. Every single incident happened after Isabella and I had talked about Mom's condition. I reached over and took my son's hand. For the first time in months, he didn't pull away. Daniel, you need to understand something. You're not the first person this has happened to. Isabella and her network have done this to dozens of families. They're experts at psychological manipulation. Agent Chen nodded. What your mother discovered led us to victims across 4 states. Adult children who were convinced their parents were mentally declining, who were guided into taking control of assets for their parents' protection. The pattern is always the same. How many families? Daniel asked. At least 30 that we can prove so far. Probably more. Daniel put his head in his hands. Oh God. Mom, what did I almost do to you? This was the moment I had been dreading since this all began. My son was finally seeing clearly, and the weight of what he had nearly done, what he had been manipulated into doing, was crushing him. You almost saved me, I said quietly. He looked up at me with confusion. Daniel, if you hadn't been so cruel to me on your birthday, if you had just gradually convinced me to sign over power of attorney, I might never have investigated. Your attack was so shocking, so unlike the son I raised, that it forced me to look deeper. In trying to destroy me, Isabella actually saved me. Agent Chen's phone buzzed. She answered it, spoke quietly for a moment, then returned to us. Mrs. Beaumont, I thought you'd want to know. We just arrested 3 more members of the network based on information from Ms. Martinez's files, including the person running the offshore accounts. What does that mean for the victims? It means we have a real chance of recovering stolen assets and helping families who thought they had lost everything. As the federal agents finished processing the scene and prepared to take Isabella into custody, I walked out to my front porch. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, giving no indication of the drama that had just unfolded. Daniel followed me outside. Mom, I don't know how to apologize for this. I don't know how to make up for what I almost did to you. I turned to look at my son, really look at him. For the first time in months, under the confusion and shame, I could see traces of the boy I had raised, the man I had believed in, even when he was breaking my heart. Daniel, do you remember what I used to tell you when you made mistakes as a child? That the mistake wasn't who I was, it was what I had done. And what I had done could be fixed. This can be fixed too, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take work. As we watched Isabella being placed in the back of a federal vehicle, I realized that winning this battle was only the beginning. The real challenge would be rebuilding trust with my son and helping him understand that he was as much a victim in this situation as I was. But for the first time in months, I had hope. The criminal network that had tried to destroy my family was about to face justice. And my son was finally free to remember who he really was. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned, and Catherine Beaumont was ready for whatever came next. 3 days after Isabella's arrest, I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about the scope of what we were facing. Mrs. Beaumont, this is Agent Chen. We need to meet immediately. There's been a development in the case that you need to know about. An hour later, Sarah Chen sat in my living room with files spread across my coffee table, her expression grim. Catherine, Isabella Martinez wasn't the top of this operation, she was middle management. What do you mean? The person running this network, the one who's been orchestrating these family destructions across multiple states, we've identified him. And you're not going to like this. She handed me a photograph that made my blood freeze. A distinguished man in his 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, standing in what appeared to be a courtroom. Do you recognize him? I stared at the photo, my mind rejecting what my eyes were seeing. That's Marcus Rothwell. He was a partner at my old firm. We worked together for 15 years. Catherine, Marcus Rothwell is the architect of this entire operation. Isabella and the others are just his field operatives. The room seemed to spin around me. Marcus Rothwell had been more than a colleague. He had been a friend, someone I had trusted, someone who had attended my husband's funeral and offered support during my darkest days. That's impossible. Marcus is a respected attorney. He has clients across 3 states. He's worth millions in his own right. Which is exactly what made him so effective at this. Think about it, Catherine. Who better to identify wealthy, vulnerable targets than someone with access to estate planning documents, wills, and family financial information? The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's been using client information to target families. For at least 5 years that we can prove. Wealthy widows and widowers who came to him for estate planning became marks for his operation. He would identify adult children who had access to family finances, then deploy people like Isabella to manipulate them. I stood up and walked to my window, trying to process this betrayal. Marcus knew everything about my finances, my family situation. When Robert died, he handled the estate transition, which means he's known for 5 years exactly how much you're worth and how to get to it through Daniel. But why wait so long? Agent Chen consulted her notes. According to Isabella's statements, Rothwell told her you were too sharp, too well connected to be an easy target. They needed to wait until you were more isolated, more vulnerable. Daniel moving out 3 years ago was the opening they were waiting for. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Marcus had watched and waited, studying my life like a predator stalking prey, until the moment when I seemed most vulnerable to attack. There's more, Catherine. We think Rothwell has been feeding information about our investigation to his operatives. Someone with his legal background would know how to stay ahead of federal investigators. What are you saying? I'm saying that even though we arrested Isabella and several others, Rothwell is still out there. And now that his operation has been exposed, he's going to be desperate to eliminate any evidence that could tie him to the crimes, including me, including you. You're the one witness who can testify about his access to confidential client information and his knowledge of potential targets. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach drop. It's him, I told Agent Chen. Marcus is calling me. She immediately signaled to agents I hadn't noticed positioned around my house, then nodded at me. Answer it. Keep him talking. Catherine, my dear. Marcus's familiar voice filled the room through the speakerphone. I just heard about the terrible situation with Daniel and that Martinez woman. Are you all right? His tone was perfectly calibrated, concerned, supportive, the voice of an old friend offering comfort in a difficult time. I'm managing, Marcus. It's been quite a shock. I can only imagine. The idea that someone would target you, of all people, for financial fraud, it's unconscionable. The casual way he lied, the complete absence of any acknowledgement of his role, was chilling. Marcus, can I ask you something? How did Isabella Martinez know so much about my financial situation? She seemed to have very specific information about my assets. There was a pause, barely perceptible, but I had spent enough time in courtrooms to recognize the moment when someone was calculating their response. These criminal networks are quite sophisticated, Catherine. They have ways of accessing information that would surprise you. What kind of ways? Well, public records, social media, even corrupt employees at financial institutions. The important thing is that you're safe now. Agent Chen was writing notes rapidly, and I could see federal agents moving into position outside my windows. Marcus, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I need to review my estate planning documents after everything that's happened. Could we meet to discuss some revisions? Of course, dear. Would you like me to come to your house? I imagine leaving home is difficult right now. The trap was perfect. Marcus Rothwell, the man who had orchestrated the destruction of dozens of families, was offering to come to my house, where federal agents would be waiting for him. That would be wonderful. Could you come tonight? I'm quite anxious to get this sorted out. I'll be there at 8. Catherine, I want you to know that I've always considered you more than just a client. What happened to you is personal to me. After we hung up, Agent Chen looked at me with something approaching admiration. That was expertly done. But Catherine, you need to understand. When Rothwell realizes this is a trap, he's going to be dangerous. A man with everything to lose and the legal knowledge to understand exactly what he's facing. We don't know how he'll react. Sarah, I've spent 40 years facing dangerous men in courtrooms. Marcus Rothwell might be a criminal mastermind, but he's about to discover that he picked the wrong woman to betray. As federal agents prepared to transform my house into a carefully orchestrated trap, I thought about all the families Marcus had destroyed, all the elderly people sitting in facilities while their life savings disappeared into offshore accounts. But mostly, I thought about the look on his face when he realized that Catherine Beaumont wasn't just another victim of his operation. I was the weapon that was going to destroy him. Tonight, the architect of this criminal empire was going to discover what happened when he tried to manipulate someone who understood the law better than he did. The real confrontation was just beginning. At exactly 8 o'clock, Marcus Rothwell's silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. I watched from my living room window as he emerged from his car, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful attorney coming to help an old friend in distress. What he didn't see were the federal agents positioned in unmarked vehicles throughout my neighborhood, or the surveillance equipment that would record every word he spoke in my house. Agent Chen's voice crackled softly through my earpiece. Remember, Catherine, we need him to explicitly discuss the operation. Don't confront him directly until we have what we need. I opened the door before Marcus could knock, greeting him with the grateful smile of a woman who believed her savior had arrived. Marcus, thank you so much for coming. I can't tell you how much I need your guidance right now. He embraced me with what felt like genuine warmth, and for a moment I was reminded of the colleague I had once trusted, the man who had stood beside me at my husband's grave. Catherine, you look exhausted. This whole ordeal must have been terrifying for you. It has been. Come in, please. I made coffee. As we settled in my living room, Marcus opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. Before we discuss your estate planning, I want you to know that I've been making some inquiries about this Martinez woman and her associates. You have? Catherine, as your attorney and your friend, I feel partially responsible for what happened. If I had been more vigilant about your security, perhaps I could have prevented this. The audacity of his performance was breathtaking. He was positioning himself as both protector and victim, the concerned attorney who had failed to prevent a crime he had orchestrated. What kind of inquiries? I've discovered that this was part of a much larger operation. These criminals have been targeting wealthy individuals across multiple states using sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques. How do they identify their targets? Marcus leaned back, his expression growing grave. That's the truly disturbing part. They appear to have access to confidential financial information, estate planning documents, investment portfolios, family structures. Someone with legitimate access to this information has been feeding it to the criminal network. Someone in the legal profession? Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. Perhaps someone with access to estate planning files or even court records. I felt Agent Chen's presence through my earpiece as Marcus continued to weave his web of deception, positioning himself as the investigator rather than the architect. Marcus, that's terrifying. How would we ever identify someone like that? It would require someone with deep knowledge of legal procedures, someone who understood how to exploit family relationships and psychological vulnerabilities. He paused, studying my face. Catherine, I have to ask, did Daniel ever mention how Isabella Martinez first approached him? I'm not sure. Why? Because these operations typically begin with what appears to be a chance encounter. Someone who seems perfect for the target, who shares their interests, who appears at exactly the right moment in their life. He was describing his own methodology with clinical precision, but framing it as external observation rather than personal experience. Now that you mention it, Daniel did say Isabella seemed to understand him better than anyone he had ever met. She appeared at a time when he was feeling isolated, questioning his life choices. Marcus nodded sagely. Classic predatory behavior. These criminals are experts at identifying emotional vulnerabilities and exploiting them. How would they know about Daniel's vulnerabilities? Someone would have had to study your family dynamics very carefully. Perhaps someone who had observed your relationship with Daniel over years, who understood the pressure points that could be exploited. Someone who knew us personally? Catherine, I hate to say this, but yes, this level of psychological manipulation requires intimate knowledge of family relationships. He was confessing to everything, while making it sound like analysis rather than admission, but I needed him to be more specific. Marcus, you handled Robert's estate planning. You know Daniel better than most people in my professional circle. If someone in the legal profession was feeding information to these criminals, would they have had access to the same information you have about my family? For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt, but calculation. He was trying to determine how much I suspected. Catherine, that's a very astute observation. Yes, anyone with access to estate planning documents would know exactly how much you're worth, how your assets are structured, and how to manipulate Daniel into believing he was acting in your best interest. Someone like you, Marcus. The words hung in the air between us. Marcus's expression didn't change, but I could see him processing the shift in our conversation. Catherine, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact. You are the architect of the criminal network that tried to destroy my family. Marcus set down his coffee cup with steady hands, his lawyer's training keeping him calm even as his world collapsed around him. That's a very serious accusation, Catherine. I hope you have some evidence to support such a claim. I have Isabella Martinez's complete cooperation with federal investigators. I have recordings of her describing the network's operations, including specific references to the legal contact who provided target information. And you believe that contact was me? I know it was you, Marcus, because you just spent the last 20 minutes describing your own operation while pretending to analyze it from the outside. Marcus stood up slowly, his demeanor transforming from concerned friend to something much more dangerous. Catherine, I think grief and stress have affected your judgment. These paranoid fantasies, the same paranoid fantasies you coached Isabella to suggest I was having, the same mental decline you helped fabricate to justify stealing my assets? You're talking nonsense. Am I? Then explain how Isabella Martinez knew that Daniel felt guilty about not spending more time with me after Robert's death. Explain how she knew that I sometimes feel isolated in this big house. Explain how she knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to make Daniel feel responsible for my well-being. Marcus's mask was slipping, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Catherine, even if what you're suggesting were true, you'd need proof that would hold up in court. Accusations aren't evidence. You're right. Accusations aren't evidence, but recordings are. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small device that had been capturing our entire conversation. Every word you've spoken tonight has been recorded by federal agents, Marcus, including your detailed description of how the operation works, your admission that it requires intimate knowledge of family dynamics, and your acknowledgement that someone in the legal profession with access to estate planning documents was feeding information to the network. The transformation was complete. The concerned friend disappeared entirely, replaced by a cornered predator. You think you've been clever, Catherine, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Do you really believe that destroying me will end this? There are contingencies you can't imagine. What kind of contingencies? The kind that ensure my silence is worth more to certain people than my testimony. The kind that make witnesses disappear when they become inconvenient. Agent Chen's voice in my earpiece was sharp. That's a threat. We're moving in now. The front door burst open as federal agents flooded into my living room. Marcus Rothwell, the man who had spent years destroying families while hiding behind the respectability of legal practice, found himself face to face with the consequences of his crimes. Marcus Rothwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, money laundering, and threatening a federal witness. As Agent Chen read him his rights, Marcus looked at me with something I had never seen in his eyes before. Respect, Catherine, I underestimated you completely. That was my mistake. No, Marcus. Your mistake was thinking that friendship and professional respect would make me an easy target. You forgot that I spent 40 years in courtrooms facing men exactly like you. As they led him away, I realized that the network's architect was finally facing justice. But I also knew that his threat about contingencies wasn't empty bluster. This war wasn't over yet. The real test would be whether the evidence we had gathered would be enough to not only convict Marcus Rothwell, but to dismantle his entire criminal empire. The trial of Marcus Rothwell began 6 months later in the federal courthouse where my husband had once presided as a judge. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the witness stand, looking out at the same courtroom where Robert had dispensed justice for 25 years. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case. Isabella Martinez's cooperation had led to the arrest of 17 members of the network across 4 states. Financial records traced over $80 million in stolen assets to offshore accounts controlled by Rothwell. Most importantly, we had identified 43 families who had been victimized by the operation. Mrs. Beaumont, the federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, addressed me from the podium. Can you describe your relationship with the defendant prior to discovering his criminal activities? Marcus Rothwell was my law partner for 15 years at Morrison & Associates. He was someone I considered not just a colleague, but a trusted friend. He attended my husband's funeral. He handled our estate planning. He had access to the most intimate details of my financial and family life. And how did he use that access? He used it to orchestrate a systematic attack on my relationship with my son, with the ultimate goal of gaining control of my assets through psychological manipulation and fraudulent legal documents. From the defense table, Marcus watched me with the same calculating expression he had worn during our final confrontation. Even facing multiple federal charges, he maintained the arrogant composure that had served him well as an attorney. The defense strategy was predictable. Portray Marcus as a successful lawyer who had been framed by actual criminals trying to reduce their own sentences. But the evidence was overwhelming. Agent Chen took the stand after me, methodically presenting recordings, financial documents, and testimony from multiple victims across different states. Agent Chen, in your investigation, did you find evidence that Mr. Rothwell specifically targeted Mrs. Beaumont? Yes. We recovered documents from Mr. Rothwell's personal files that included detailed psychological profiles of potential victims, including a comprehensive analysis of Mrs. Beaumont's family relationships, financial vulnerabilities, and emotional state following her husband's death. How detailed were these profiles? Extremely detailed. Mr. Rothwell had documented Mrs. Beaumont's feelings of isolation, her concerns about her relationship with her son, her desire to remain independent, and specific strategies for exploiting these emotional vulnerabilities. The most damaging testimony came from Isabella Martinez herself. The prosecution had offered her a reduced sentence in exchange for complete cooperation, and she delivered exactly what they needed. Ms. Martinez, who gave you the initial information about Daniel Beaumont and his family? Marcus Rothwell. He provided me with a complete file on the family, financial records, psychological assessments, even transcripts of conversations between Mrs. Beaumont and her son that he had somehow recorded. Did Mr. Rothwell give you specific instructions on how to manipulate Mr. Daniel Beaumont? Yes. He told me that Daniel felt guilty about not being closer to his mother after his father died, but that he also resented feeling responsible for her emotional well-being. Marcus said the key was to make Daniel believe his mother was becoming dependent and unstable, then position myself as someone who could help him handle the situation. And what was the ultimate goal? To get Mrs. Beaumont declared mentally incompetent and gain control of her assets through her son. Marcus said once we had legal control, we could liquidate everything and transfer the money offshore before anyone could stop us. The defense attorney, a skilled criminal lawyer from New York, did his best to create doubt. Ms. Martinez, isn't it true that you're testifying against my client in exchange for a significantly reduced prison sentence? Yes. And isn't it possible that you're simply telling the prosecution what they want to hear to minimize your own punishment? Isabella looked directly at Marcus for the first time during her testimony. Mr. Rothwell destroyed my life too. He convinced me that what we were doing was helping families make difficult decisions about elderly relatives who couldn't care for themselves anymore. I didn't realize until it was too late that we were stealing from people and destroying families. But you participated willingly in defrauding Mrs. Beaumont? I participated willingly in what I believed was helping a son make difficult decisions about his mother's care. I didn't know that Mrs. Beaumont was completely mentally competent and that we were manufacturing evidence of cognitive decline. The defense attorney pressed harder. Ms. Martinez, you've admitted to being a skilled manipulator. How do we know you're not manipulating this jury right now? Isabella's answer was devastating in its simplicity. Because Mrs. Beaumont outsmarted all of us. She exposed our entire operation and saved not just herself, but dozens of other families. If I were still the person I was when I was working for Marcus, I'd be trying to figure out how to manipulate her instead of testifying against her. But the most powerful moment came when Daniel took the stand. Mr. Beaumont, can you describe your relationship with your mother before you met Isabella Martinez? My mother is the strongest, most intelligent woman I know. She built a successful law practice, raised me as a single parent after my father died when I was young, and has always been completely independent and sharp. And after you began your relationship with Ms. Martinez? Daniel's voice broke slightly. I started seeing my mother as a burden, someone who was becoming dependent and possibly mentally ill. I began to believe that the kindest thing I could do was take control of her life before she could hurt herself or make poor decisions. Do you now believe your mother was suffering from mental decline? No. My mother is one of the sharpest people I know. She orchestrated a federal investigation that brought down an entire criminal network. The only person showing poor judgment was me. What would have happened if your mother had signed those power of attorney documents? Daniel looked directly at Marcus, his voice steady with conviction. My mother would have lost everything she spent a lifetime building. She would have been institutionalized against her will, and I would have been the weapon they used to destroy her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, money laundering, and racketeering. As the judge read the sentence, 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began: complete closure. Marcus Rothwell, the man who had spent years destroying families while hiding behind professional respectability, would spend the rest of his life in prison. But more importantly, the evidence presented at trial had led to the recovery of over $60 million in stolen assets, money that was being returned to the families who had been victimized by his network. As I walked out of the courthouse, Daniel beside me for the first time in months, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration of stolen money, broken families, and lost trust. The architect of our destruction had fallen. But the real victory was that the families he had tried to tear apart were finally beginning to heal. 1 year after Marcus Rothwell's conviction, I received a letter that changed my perspective on everything we had endured. It was from Margaret Chen, a 72-year-old widow from San Francisco whose daughter had been manipulated into having her declared mentally incompetent and placed in a care facility. Mrs. Beaumont, the letter began, because of your courage in exposing the Rothwell network, I have been declared competent and released from Sunset Manor Care Facility. My daughter Sarah and I are rebuilding our relationship, and I have recovered most of my stolen assets. You saved my life and the lives of so many others. I wanted you to know that your fight mattered to families you've never met. I was sitting on my back porch, the same porch where I had cried after Daniel's birthday attack 18 months earlier. But this time, the tears were different. They were tears of gratitude for the journey that had transformed a moment of devastating betrayal into something much more powerful. Daniel appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Our relationship had been slowly healing over the past year, built on a foundation of complete honesty about what had happened and how we had both been victimized by people who understood how to weaponize love against families. Another letter from someone the case helped? He asked, settling into the chair beside me. Margaret Chen from San Francisco. She says she's moving back into her own home next month. That's 47 families now, isn't it? 47 families who got their lives back because we refused to let them win. Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying his coffee. "Mom, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for months?" "Of course." "When you were planning the investigation, when you were setting up the trap for Isabella and Marcus, were you afraid?" I thought about his question carefully. I was terrified, not of them, but of losing you forever. I was afraid that even after we exposed what they had done, the damage to our relationship might be permanent. I was so cruel to you. You were manipulated by experts who understood exactly how to turn your love for me into a weapon against both of us. But I said those things to you. I chose to believe that you were becoming a burden instead of questioning why I suddenly felt that way. This was the conversation we had been building toward for months, the one that would determine whether our family could truly heal or remain forever damaged by what we had experienced. "Daniel, can I tell you something I learned during 40 years of practicing law?" "What's that?" "The measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's what they do when they discover they've been wrong." "What do you mean?" "When you realized what had happened, when you understood how you had been manipulated, you didn't make excuses. You didn't blame Isabella or Marcus for your choices. You took responsibility, and you've spent every day since then proving that the son I raised is still there, underneath the confusion they created." Daniel reached over and took my hand. "I'm never going to stop being sorry for what I almost did to you, and I'm never going to stop being proud of the man you've become since then." That evening, Agent Sarah Chen called with news that brought our journey full circle. "Catherine, I wanted you to know that Marcus Rothwell died in federal prison this morning. Heart attack. He was 58 years old. I felt no satisfaction in his death, only a sense of completion. The man who had orchestrated so much suffering had faced justice, and his network had been completely dismantled. What about the other cases? Are there still victims who haven't been identified? We've recovered assets for every victim we've identified, and we've established a hotline for people who think they might have been targeted by similar operations. Your case became the template for investigating organized elder abuse. Sarah, there's something I want to do, something I should have done months ago." "What's that?" "I want to start a foundation, something that helps families who have been victimized by financial manipulation, but also something that educates people about how these schemes work." "That's a wonderful idea. What would you call it?" I looked out at my garden, where I had spent so many hours over the past year thinking about second chances and the strength that comes from surviving betrayal. "The Catherine Beaumont Foundation for Family Protection." Because the most important thing I learned is that the people who love us can be turned against us, but they can also be saved if someone is willing to fight for the truth. 6 months later, the foundation held its first conference for families who had survived financial manipulation schemes. Daniel spoke to the audience about his experience as a victim of psychological manipulation, while I presented on the legal strategies that families could use to protect themselves. But the most meaningful moment came when Isabella Martinez, now serving a reduced sentence in federal prison, sent a video message that was played for the conference attendees. "My name is Isabella Martinez, and I was a predator who destroyed families for money," she said, looking directly into the camera. "I want you to know that everything Mrs. Beaumont did to expose our network was an act of love. Love for her son, love for her family, and love for families she had never met who were being victimized by people like me. She saved more than her own family. She saved all of us from becoming something we never should have been." As I watched that video, surrounded by dozens of families who had survived similar attacks on their bonds and their trust, I realized something profound. The cruelest betrayal of my life had been transformed into the most meaningful victory. Marcus Rothwell and his network had tried to convince me that I was a lonely, vulnerable old woman whose time of relevance had passed. Instead, they had discovered that I was a force of nature who became more dangerous when threatened. But more than that, they had unwittingly given me something I had never expected, a purpose that extended far beyond my own life and family. Every family we helped, every scheme we exposed, every relationship we saved, it all grew from that moment when my son told me the best gift would be for me to disappear from his life. I never did disappear. Instead, I became exactly who I was always meant to be, a woman who refused to be broken, who turned pain into power, and who discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles we never wanted to fight. The boy who had once wished I would disappear was now my greatest ally in ensuring that no other family would have to endure what we had survived. And that, I realized, was the most perfect revenge of all.